You can find out a lot on the internet. One thing you can't find out is when Ray Ferraro did his first World Junior tournament. And so it occurred to me that I'm like, um, I don't know that, but also I was like, I don't know if I know the story of how you transitioned from playing hockey professionally to talking about hockey professionally. Can we start there? Can you just take us back to when you made that move?
Well, one thing the Ferraros can do is talk, and that comes from my mom.
Yeah,
Anna was just an amazing woman. She was the happiest. Um, just she always had a great spirit about her, and mom passed in 2004, and on her headstone we have this saying, and she used to say it all the time, was do your best, make peace with the rest. And that's just the way that mom lived. So I make the NHL my dream of dreams, right? And like,
for sure.
what could be better than that? So as I'm playing, um, I'm playing in New York. I get traded from Hartford to New York to the Islanders, and I'm doing my thing, and I I talk, right. I do interviews, and it's just I became a popular um, player to go to because I don't know, I like to talk. So I get traded in 1996 in March from the Rangers to LA. It takes me totally by surprise. I got no idea it's coming. I get to LA, and a few weeks later, I get a call from my agent, Steve Bartlett. And Steve's sons are Kevin and Brian are both in the business. They're really good at what they do. They have Kale McCarr and lots of great players. So he calls me and he says, "Hey, would you like to go to ESPN in the first round of the playoffs to do NHL Tonight?" Well, I'm still playing, right? And so I'm like, "Well, Steve, I don't even really know what I'm doing." And like, how did that contact come up? Because the Kings weren't going to make the playoffs. Well, everybody needs a, a break or an angel that kind of thinks something of you to give you this chance.
No doubt.
And so for me, it was a man named Barry Sachs. And Barry was an enormous Ranger fan. He he had a thick New York accent. He'd always go, "What do you think of them Rangers?" And oh man, he was a collective person. Like his
Yeah.
office was always full of people and hockey stuff and all the other stuff he was doing. So, anyways, he had reached out to Steve somehow and said, "Hey, would Ray come in? I've seen him do a lot of interviews. I think he'd be good at this. Would he like to come in?" So season ends, I go to ESPN. I don't know anything about television at this point, like literally nothing. We go to a production meeting at 3 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, so what happens next? They're like, well, we watch the games, we have dinner, and then we put the show together. And then at 11 o'clock, we're on the air. I'm like, today? Like, I had no idea. No idea.
Yeah. And if you didn't, like, I look at it, I'm like, it looks pretty simple
It really
on your
does.
TV. Yeah.
Okay, so in the studio at the time, it was a small studio, and there's three cameras, right? There's three guys, there's three cameras. One they call the three shot, which is everybody. And then the host has his own camera. And then the other camera would vary between Barry Melrose and myself. The guy would just move the camera. And so Barry was amazing to work with. Just there is no better guy to work with. Nothing bothered Barry. If we had to redo something, he didn't care. He's like, no. He used to have this phrase. He'd say, "Time to make the donuts," and we'd, like, time to go to work, right? Just
Yeah.
make the donuts, keep making them. And
Yeah.
so we get on the air the first night. As I said, there's three cameras. I can't find my camera. I don't know where to look. It's the one with the red light on the top, though. Like, it's not that hard. And so, what is totally discombobulating, though, is the example I give is I'm talking about Monday, and my producer is talking in my ear about Tuesday
Yeah.
because he's telling you where you're going and how much time you have and, oh, got to wrap this up. Now, sometimes you get told you got to wrap something up and you've really just started your thought. So now, whatever you were going to say it way faster and don't sound like you're going way faster, right? So in that little example, I hope you get a little bit of an indication of like it's not it's not just what it appears. There's there's so much going on. So, anyways, I finished the first show, and again, I don't really know what's going on. I think it goes okay. I'm not sure. I take my jacket off. I had a light blue sports shirt on, or my jacket. I have a light blue shirt on. I got a sweat stain from my elbow to my rib cage on
Oh,
both sides. I am
I
like,
don't doubt it. I
I am
don't doubt it.
terrified. And so, you know, somebody says, "Oh yeah, good job," and I'm like, I can't remember anything I've said. Like nothing. So I go through 2 weeks, and the first round of the playoffs, and I would say each couple of days you get a little bit more familiar, and like even just like the route you walk to the studio, the if you need to find the bathroom, you can find the bathroom. Like it all becomes a little more locked in. Then the 2 weeks are up and I leave. They're like, oh, great, thanks a lot. That was it. So the next year, the Kings are out of the playoffs again. And they call me back and say, would you like to stay for a month? So I
And you're
stayed
in Bristol that whole time.
the whole time. I'm in a residence inn sort of hotel. I loved it because it was all sports all the time. And and so you'd watch the games. I'd get up in, like mid to late morning because we sometimes like you had to wait till the games were over. So West Coast games and at 10:30 West Coast time. That's 1:30 in Bristol. We'd finish it close to 3 o'clock. So by the time I got up, it was almost lunch. Eat, go to the gym, kind of hang out, take a nap, then go back and start prepping for the next day. And so that was my life at that time. And so there was myself and Barry, of course, and John Butchergross came in as the host. And so we had like every day was us three guys. And it was really fun.
I bet
And
the Three Amigos. No kidding.
and it got to be like maybe so Barry Sachs was my angel. He was the one that reached out and said, hey, I think you can do this. The fact that the Kings sucked and we weren't in the playoffs gave me the runway to
Yeah.
do this and to start to think, oh, this is kind of fun. Like maybe I could do this more. But this was 1997. I didn't retire for another 5 years.
Well, and I was going to say too, I mean, there's not a lot of jobs doing what you do today, but back
Right.
then it would have been, I cut it in half at least, I would think.
Well, there was I couldn't do a regional game. I mean, I was playing for the Kings. And so if I was going to do anything while I was playing, it would have had to be at a national network. Well, who was offering that up? Like how fortunate timing wise was my trade to LA, the fact that ESPN had hockey at the time. Um, and then I went on and again, like I said, I didn't I think one of the best parts of my journey as a broadcaster is I had very little guidance, but I had a couple of people along the way that would give me like a little nugget, like real broadcasters, not like a hockey player trying to be a broadcaster. And they'd say, why don't you think about this? Like, for example, I used to say, alls I know, as a point to fact to say, look, this is what I know. And so it was a producer, and he said, "Alls is not a word." And I'm like, "It's not?" And he's like, "No, alls. Like, what is that?" And he goes, "You could say all that I know, or something else, but alls, it's a bad habit." So every time I would say alls, he would say it in my ear. He would just go alls, and he
Which is
broke me. But
probably like a benefit, but also incredibly distracting.
frustrating. No,
Yeah, for
frustrating.
sure.
I'd be like, I did it again. Because you don't, if you think about it, you've got a speech habit you don't even know about.
No question.
But he told me that. Another one John Butchergross did with me quite frequently is he'd say, we'd be coming back from a commercial. And, in our ear, they'd be like 15 seconds. And John would just turn and go, I'm going to ask you something about Colorado. And I'd go, what? And he'd go, not going to tell you. And what he wanted me to do was he was teaching me to be prepared. So that if he was going to ask, he wasn't asking me something about, that we weren't, like, that wasn't in the realm of what we were speaking of, but it would be like, here's Colorado. I'm going to ask you a question. You just better be prepared. Because he wanted me talking naturally, not
Yeah,
as a broadcaster. And this is what right? Like, who wants to listen to that? And
totally.
it taught me to be prepared. And so the preparation that I do, even to this day, is excessive. I don't do, I do it differently and more efficiently than I used to, but preparation's the whole gig. It's like, I think you can tell when people aren't prepared in sport or in anything that you watch presented, and you can tell when somebody is, because there's an ease in the way that you're able to transport the information to the viewer. I got to tell you one funny story though. Playing and broadcasting at the same time is not easy because everybody that's in the league, you're now
Oh,
critiquing, right, on the air. At some point, you're talking
yeah.
about this team and, oh, they should do this. And because you're an expert, you're sitting in a suit, right? Like, you're an expert.
You must have gotten chirped like
Here's the
nonstop.
best one. We're playing Detroit. And do you remember Yuri Fisher?
Sure do. Yeah. Big D man.
6'5" monster. He's got me pinned. There was some scuffle. He's got me pinned on the back of the net. I'm basically there until he decides I can leave. Like, how am I going to get away, right?
Yeah.
So he's got me pinned there. And Steve Eiserman skates by and goes, hey, Ray, why don't you analyze that? And he keeps on going. And I was like, I was so mad. But there was nothing to do, nowhere to go. Like, what was I going to do? What was I going to say? Like, well, so like, yeah, I heard
That's
that a
so good.
little bit of time.
You know what? I thought about this. There was a great line from Troy Aikman. Somebody asked him in the summer and said, like, what's the biggest thing that Tom Brady's going to have to adjust to when he gets in the booth? And he said something to the effect of, it's going to be really challenging because you're going to have 2 seconds to think about what you're going to say, and you're going to have 10 to 12 seconds to say something that you'd probably like at least 2 minutes to start and finish your thought. And
Yeah.
he goes, anybody in our shoes, you think you're going to, because you played football or in your case, hockey, you think it's going to be natural. And he's like, it's going to take a lot of work. And, yeah. And I know when I heard that, I was like, man, like that makes a ton of sense. It would be incredibly
Well,
challenging.
I'm sure, like, Aikman's one of the best, right? I love listening to him. I like his
Amazing.
delivery. I love Chris Collinsworth too.
The best,
Those
my
are
favorite.
those are those are my two favorites in football. John Davidson was my guy that I wanted to emulate um, as a hockey analyst. He just had just this great way of speaking and um, and delivering the message that he wanted to deliver. But to the point you made with Aikman, I liken a lot of times um, games going on, and in a way, football's a lot easier to broadcast than hockey because there's a start and a finish to every play. Then there's a built-in time for a highlight, a review of that play. Well, in hockey, I've got to jump in and jump out. In the old days, the play-by-play guy talked till there was a whistle. And that's not the way it is now. It's supposed to be more conversational. Well, I've got to jump in and jump out without stepping on the play by play description of what's going on. And sometimes you don't get out when you want to. So just what Troy's talking about is he's got 10 to 12 seconds. I might have 3 to 4.
And you don't have the benefit of body language to look at your partner
No, but
beside you. Like
that's my own fault because I like to be downstairs.
okay.
I mean, I like to be there because I think it's the very best place. I can see the puck spinning. I can hear a few things that I can relay that otherwise would just get missed. There are highlights that happen that we would only get because I'm standing there. Like there was, I'll give you an example before I get back to what Troy said. There was a play in the playoffs 2 years ago. Zibanejad's broken his stick. He's going back to the Ranger bench uh, as he's back checking. But the trainer at the time, who's in his part of his gig is the sticks, he doesn't have Zibanejad's stick ready because he's changing the blades of some player, two guys down the bench.
Yeah.
So Zibanejad, it just so happened the door opened. I forget why, but Zibanejad came right in the door, grabbed his own stick, jumped back on the ice, and ended up scoring.
No
If
way.
if I'm not standing there, there's no way I could see all of that interaction,
Yeah.
right? So that's one example of why I like being down there. It's a great place. I'm really lucky. The thing I'll say about Aikman is about his point. So I liken it as when you're driving down the highway and you're in the middle lane and you've got to exit and your exit is there, but there's traffic there and you can't get there, but you got to get there and you miss the exit. That's what it feels like when I'm talking and somebody takes a shot on goal. You can't believe how hard I cheer for the goalie when he makes a save while I'm
Yeah.
talking, because there's nothing more embarrassing and worse for an analyst to be talking when the play-by-play guy is calling a goal. That is the worst.
I'm sure, and you know what? I've never looked at it through that lens, but using the Zibanejad example, it's like when you see those things, like I'm sure you're so compelled to get that to share that story because it's so unique. And as you said, that if it's not like you can, in the third period say, "Hey, can we go back to this thing that happened in the first?" You
No,
gotta
it's too
you gotta
late.
land that plane as right away.
And the producer and the director, they've got to all work in concert. Like if people could see the absolute mayhem that goes into getting stuff on the air, you would find it comical. Like I was told go in the production truck and watch a game, so you understand what's going on. I lasted one period. I'm like, I don't even want. It's like sausage. I don't even want to know what's in there.
Yeah.
Like these people are all doing their thing, and it all has to fit. And at the head of it is this producer who's got. I think he's listening to me, but the producer's listening to like six different people at the same time, and he's piecing it all together. Right? It's really it's a chaotic path that has to look smooth when it hits the air. And so like some days it goes a lot smoother than others. Some days we walk out of there and go, "What the was that?" Because we've all bumped ourselves on the curb somewhere and you're like, "Oh, that was brutal." And then somebody else will go, "Oh yeah, but then I screwed this up." And lots of times people wouldn't watching at home wouldn't know.
But how much does chemistry play into all this? And so, I mean, when it comes to the two examples, I think of like, one, I connected with you in God, it was in Copenhagen at the World Championships, and it was after a game, and Gord Miller was with you. I could listen to Gord Miller tell stories till the sun comes up. Like what a just a prince of a guy.
Yeah.
But for that run you guys had at the World
Oh,
Championships and World Juniors, like the chemistry is so great. And I know just locally in our market here, I think with yourself and John Shorthouse when you do the Canuck games, it sounds natural. But I look at that and I'm like, it could just as easily not be natural.
yeah. Oh,
Does
yeah, for
that just
sure.
happen, or do you have to work at that?
Well, Gord, for me, Gord is in a different category. We literally did hundreds and hundreds of games together.
Yeah,
I didn't even you said about being next to your play by play guy making a connection when you need to talk or whatever. I could tell when Gord was going to lay out. He could tell when I was going to start to talk or finish. We could we could needle each other on the air, and it was because we have we're very like our interests are not the same. Gord's a political junkie, a world events guy. Me, I can't see 5 feet in front of my feet, right? Like I play golf. That's all I want to do. I watch sports. That's it. Like I don't know. Half the time he would be telling me something. He's like my own news service. I don't know. And Shorty is like Shorty's just good and he's easy. And the connection is, Shorty and I and Dan Murphy have played many rounds of golf together, right? So we know each other away. Like I would say, I'm at ESPN now, and my primary play-by-play is Sean McDonough. And
Yeah.
when Sean and I started, Sean hadn't done hockey in 17 years.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's one of the great football announcers of all time. You listen to Sean McDonough do a football game, it's not being done better. Like he just like there are guys, like I mean Nance is amazing, and
Yeah.
and Mike Tirico's brilliant. Like those guys they're amazing. Sean is in their category. He's fantastic at it. The pacing and the timing of hockey is so much different. And then I'm downstairs and Sean's upstairs. Our first game was the NHL ESPN opener. That was our first game. Like, of course, we were
So
stepping
no
all over.
preseason.
No, there's no preseason. We're stepping all over each other. I'm frustrated. He's frustrated because we both know this has to get better. Well, the only way it gets better is with reps
Yeah.
and not 5 reps, 50, 100, right? So now we're in year 4, and our Stanley Cup final last year was leaps and bounds the best we've ever done. It was, it, I'll say it was easy, even though I don't mean it's easy, but it was just like, yeah, I knew when he was going to talk. He knew when I was going to talk. Every once in a while, you step on each other. I do it with Gord too. But now we've worked 100 games together, Sean and I, or more, 120 games probably in 3 years. We've got a general sense of how to present this. And so the chemistry it's critical, important, it's everything. And I'm I'm sure Sean would say the same thing. We're way more comfortable doing a game now than when we started. I I'm so lucky. Chris Cuthbert. Well, I started with Kevin Quinn with the Oilers, then Chris Cuthbert and Gord and Sean and the guys I work with at ESPN infrequently takes a little bit more work, but those guys, they're among the best. And so how lucky am I that I don't have to worry about whether they're prepared or not. They're prepared. I hope they never worry about me either. They're like, yeah, that guy's prepared down there. And then we do the game. Like broadcasting it's a dance. And it's a dance of knowledge and personality and storytelling, but also of analysis. Like I'm blessed with a pretty good recall of what I see. And so when something happens, I generally I don't even really know why. I kind of just I sense where the key moment of that play was. And there's one thing that like for me, um, I never forget how hard the frickin' game is. You will
Yeah.
never hear from me, oh, he's got to do something better than that. You'll never hear that from me. Of course he does, because he had the puck, and 2 seconds later, the other team shot it in the net. Of course he's got to do something better. I like to try and say, it's a bad decision. He had this option and that option.
For sure.
Like I think you have to acknowledge that the game is really incredibly difficult. And I think some guys, especially today, not, and I'm not talking specific to hockey, I mean in general, they forget in the need to be noticed and stand out. Critical gets you noticed. But if you take a look back, we've all made those same mistakes 8 million times when we played. There is nothing a guy can screw up on the ice that I haven't done. I've screwed it up. I think short of shooting the puck in my own net, I've screwed up just about every other way you can. That's sports, man.
You know what? As you say all that, Ray, like you refer to it as a dance, which makes total sense. But I think also so many parallels to just being on a team in terms of the trust you have to have in each other. Being accountable in terms of your preparation. And I would say that um, you know, you don't appreciate an NHL hockey game until you've seen it from ice level. Like it's a totally different sport. A good friend of mine's got season tickets right behind the visitors bench at Rogers Arena, and you go down there, and not only do you see the on ice perspective, but as you noted, just all the chaos that's going on the bench, and you're like, man, you just have such an appreciation for just how athletic, how talented these guys are. Um, you start your broadcasting career in 2012. You start during the World Juniors.
I retired in May of '02. My last game was a loss at Detroit. We got eliminated from the playoffs with St. Louis. And I knew I was going to retire. I just gotten divorced, and it was time to do other things, whatever that might be. Because at the time, I had no idea. I got a call, hey, would you like to audition for the Oilers color job? I'm like, well, I live in Vancouver, although I didn't even have a house here. I knew I was going to live here. And they're like, you could fly in and do the games if you get the job. So I went and auditioned. I got the job. So from 2002 to 2007, I was the Oilers, 5 years, the Oilers color broadcaster for Sportsnet. 2008, Glenn Healy left TSN, my old Islander teammate. He left TSN to go to CBC for Hockey Night in Canada. So he calls me, he's like, hey, I'm going to leave and go to CBC. You should get your name in and audition for that spot. And so that's how I ended up moving in '08 to TSN. I auditioned and got the spot.
So you do that, and I'm sure that gosh, every game's a big event, but particularly for anybody that's listening to this from Canada, I mean, we can all appreciate that the World Juniors is just like it's woven into our lives. When you get that opportunity to do the World Juniors, did that seem like an easy transition, or the fact that you're going to be in just about every living room in our country from coast to coast, from Boxing Day until the gold medal game, not to mention that you're doing multiple games a day on back-to-back days. How much does that change your routine or preparation?
Well, when Pierre Maguire had left and gone to NBC,
Yeah,
and so they needed a new color guy. And I was the number 2 color guy at TSN. Pierre and Gord did the Leaf games, the World Juniors, and the World Championships. So
yeah,
now that whole position opened up. So I talked to Paul Graham, who is just retiring this year at TSN, but international hockey was really Paul's thing. Um, he also, he's the executive producer of all the hockey as well, but the international stuff was like that was his baby. So I ended up getting the gig. It's the 2012 tournament in Calgary and Edmonton. I'm terrified because I don't know how to prepare. I don't know who do I talk to. Like, how am I going to figure out uh, 10 teams of junior players that I've never seen before?
oh yeah.
Like it's terrifying because how am I possibly going to do this? So, naturally, I'm working with Gord, which is, he tells me immediately, first off, it's just hockey, right? Like the hockey part you'll get. Um, the second part is you'll grow to love this tournament immediately, right? So I'm already, I'm excited because I know it's the biggest hockey show in Canada
Yeah.
at that time of the year, right? Um, I, I, I got to figure out how to prepare. So I learned that TSN has a staff that they put together these notes on 60% of the players because the rosters, Aaron, don't get finalized till Christmas night.
Oh, yeah.
So each time a roster finalization came in, it was like it was like victory because then you could really get into your prep. So Christmas night, and this actually became one of the reasons why I stopped doing it, was Christmas night until late into the Boxing Day morning. I'm up and prepping because it, there's no other way. Like it's cramming for the exam,
Yeah.
right? And of course, Canada's at the forefront of that prep, but Canada doesn't play Canada. They play a whole bunch of other people. So I got to figure out A, who are these people? B, how the hell do I pronounce their names?
Oh, so
Okay. So again, this is not this is not to I hope Gord never hears this because his ego does not need the blast it's going to get here. Gord is a brilliant broadcaster, but also a efficient and smart preparer of the games. So we would start about I don't know, the 10th of December and start calling agents, coaches, GMs, heads of hockey federations, whoever Gord was connected to, and we'd have conference calls and just start taking notes. And
no kidding.
it was exhaustive, but critical. And for me, it became my security blanket that I know that I'm going to get these calls in and, and be able to start culling and putting together information, right? So, like, here's the other part of this. The NHL is still going on. I've still got NHL games. So, we would be doing pre tournament games, say on the 19th and 21st. And oh, yeah, you got a game on the 22nd in Pittsburgh. And you'd go and do that and then like rejig your brain and get back, get home, have Christmas. Some years not Christmas because it was in Europe. And so from the age of 6 until I stopped, um, my Cammy and I's oldest son, Riley, was born in 2006. So he was 6, turned 6 in the tournament of 2012. And from then until Riley was 16, I worked every Christmas. And there was a point, and we've talked about this a little bit. I went, well, what the hell am I doing here? Like, Riley's in grade 12. He's likely going to college next year. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I'm missing all of this. I love the tournament. I love everything about it, but it's going fast. And those are the reasons really why that's why I stopped doing it. It wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because the time had come.
Well, which makes total sense. But, it's funny, my wife, for example, she doesn't know you as Ray Ferraro, the hockey player. She doesn't know you as Ray Ferraro on ESPN or TSN. She knows you as, oh, that's the guy that shows up on the TV at the World Juniors. And I think there's probably a lot of Canadians, especially like that. You've just become, again, sort of the fabric of our holiday season, honestly. But I want to go back to the pronunciation because when I listen to these broadcasts, like I'm imagining you in your hotel room, like Ron Burgundy, staring at the mirror, being like, Fetisov passes to Grigorenko, and trying to, like, I can't. You talk about the reps you need to get the broadcast down. I can't imagine the reps you need to get some of these names to roll off your tongue in the moment.
Okay, so we go over them right before the game. And so we'd go down the list and I'd say the name and Gord would correct me. Like 6 guys a roster,
Yeah,
right? And what happens is over a couple of years, you learn the rules of that language.
sure. Yeah,
And so, like, oh, that's not a ch, it's a k. And of course, in the middle of the game, like, there's a couple names. If you say, at least in my brain, if I get the name wrong the first time, chances are I'm going to get it wrong 14 more times until I finally.
totally.
Okay, I got to tell a quick story because the
Yeah,
guy's an amazing guy. Is John Abbott.
yeah.
He's the play-by-play in Calgary now. So we're at the World Championships. Gord loses his voice. So they literally haul John out of the hotel, and you're like, we got to do a game between somebody and France. There's a player for France. His name is Manavian. Is his last name. So we're going through, like, John literally comes up the stairs. He's like, he's on fire. And we're going through and he goes, Manavian. And I go, no, Manavian. And he says it another way. And I'm like, so it happens like 3 or 4 times. This is in the pregame. And I go, don't worry about it. Guy never touches the puck. That first period, this guy had the puck on his stick
Game of his life.
57 times. It must have sounded like there were 200 players playing for France. And every time he knew he screwed it up. And so I took a Sharpie during the game and wrote man, like in Sharpie all over the guy's name.
That's amazing.
And we were laughing so hard because anyone that's broadcast has a kryptonite. It's a name you look at, and for the life of you, you can't get it right. Like it's not even, sometimes it's not even a hard name. Okay, like when Nico Hischer, it used to be
Yeah.
Hischer. I have in my head Hischer. It's Hischer.
And it's probably tough to get it out.
Well, it's impossible because I keep
Yeah.
getting it wrong and I keep hearing from Jersey fans all these years later. Like, you'd think I'd be able to get it right. Yeah, anyway, but so the pronunciation's a second layer of challenge. Like, first of all, learning these guys and then trying to put them onto a number. And this again, to Gord, is whenever the play is happening, Gord's calling these numbers and names immediately. I'm a second behind, right? Because I only have to analyze it. And so if there's a replay and number 14 on Slovakia is taking the shot, and I can't remember his name in the moment, I can look down and see it. Gord's calling it in the game. Like that's another level.
It's fascinating. And I would think about this too. Like, I mean, you're a fan as well. I mean, it's so clear just listening to you now. You're you're a fan of the game. And um, are there ever moments where, because you're watching perhaps a particular play, perhaps it's a high stakes moments, perhaps it's just a player where you're like, holy shit, you just get caught up in appreciating how talented they
Oh
are,
yeah.
where you got to sort of almost pull yourself out of that and get back in the broadcasting zone.
Okay, there's a little difference between an NHL game and a junior game, the World Champ or the World Juniors.
Sure.
Um, the difference is I'm far more likely to be, I'll say critical, but I don't know if that's the word. I'll look at things with a sharper eye in the NHL
Yeah.
than at the tournament. These are 17 and 18 and 19-year-old kids. Many of them are playing incredible pressure for the first time in their lives. For most of these players, this is the biggest stage and the biggest stakes they'll ever play for. Like, quite frankly, don't be an asshole. These are kids representing their country. Like, so I view it different. I'm excited for all of it when I was broadcasting them. Like, it is, like you look at these guys, you're like, oh my God, like they're just kids. Look how good they are. Like be respectful of a smaller country that is getting their lunch handed to them because they might have 14 rinks in the country. Like you got to remember that. And so, but when I'm the guy I always think of, and I always tell this story, I always had to remind myself doing a Detroit Red Wing game that I'm not the president of Pavel Datsuk's fan club. I love Pavel Datsuk, my favorite
Yeah.
player.
Yeah.
I would watch him and go, like I'd want to run a highlight. Oh my God, look at how he picked up his stick. Like everything he did, and he's so humble in his approach. And I was just fascinated watching him do what he does. Now, there's other guys, of course, like how can you not be a fan of McDavid or McKinnon? First time I saw Nate McKinnon on the ice, he was wearing a cage at the World Junior Tournament because he was an underage player.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, he looked like a peewee. And you're like, this guy's going to be a great player. He's got a cage on still. And it didn't take long. You go, oh, he skates
Yeah.
different than most people.
You might
So
figure it out.
yeah, so it's like these kids try so hard, Aaron. Like the effort, the intensity, the commitment. Like for all of these kids, it's like, how can you not be taken up in it? It's just it's a and this isn't even looking back and having an appreciation. This is while in it. It's an amazing tournament. It just to see these kids have the opportunity to do what they're doing at that time in front of a full building, and it's crazy if people don't realize how the tournaments are attended in Europe. Like I know we think this is just a Canadian built up tournament. One of the greatest tournaments I was at was in Helsinki. The
In 2016?
Finns won.
Yeah.
Their top line, like just think of some of these players. Their top line was Puya Järvi led the tournament in scoring. He had 17 points.
Yeah.
They had this line A fella and
Yeah.
this kid that was at center ice that we saw before the final game in his
Like
t-shirt.
150 pounds.
Oh, I said to Gord, I go, that's Sebastian Aho? Like
Yeah.
his legs, like he was a kid. And he, like, anyway, those were the players at that tournament. The Finns won, and it was like the horn sounded and the party was on in that country. We were thankful to get the hell out of there the next day because that was going to go sideways.
I had some pals that went to that tournament.
Oh yeah,
And it was their first time going to see, and I remember they like I'm getting text messages at all hours of the day.
yes.
And they're like in the way they sort of described it, they said in Canada, like the party's in the rink and it's sort
Yeah.
of confined to the rink. They're like, here, it's the party starts when you wake up and it's all over town and then it flows into the rink and then it flows out of the rink and it keeps going. And I just want to mention too, you make a great point about for some of these countries, like they go into the tournament knowing they're probably not going to win gold. Um, and I've got a friend, Philip Pinter, who's a coach with the Austrian national team, and I think it was a couple years ago. The tournament was in Edmonton and didn't go great. And so, like, I'm messaging and I'm like, hey, how's it going? And then you get his perspective. He's like, this was like the greatest opportunity for our kids. They get to travel to another country. They play in front of 18,000 people, and this memory and experience is never going to leave them. So I think that's really
Oh,
well said.
Aaron, I'm going to tell a quick thing here.
Yeah.
You asked me as we were talking, prepping for this a bit, like things that I remember that maybe stood out.
Yeah.
One of the greatest memories I have of the World Junior, I didn't even need to look up the year, which is rare for me because the
Yeah.
years, they kind of like mush together. But in 2015, Slovakia won the bronze medal in Toronto.
Yes.
Okay, they had this goalie. His name was Dennis Godla. And I don't know, if he was 5'10", that was max. He was the MVP of the tournament. He was spectacular. I think he gave up like 18 goals. Like there was a couple of games they got their lunch handed to them, right? This kid was spectacular. And in this tournament, which Canada beat Russia 5-4 in the gold medal game, Canada had a 5-1 lead. The Russians came back to make it 5-4. And so, like, there was this pressure filled third period, and McDavid was in that tournament, and Sam Reinhart, like, pretty good guys. I remember Dennis Godla's performance and the crowd chanting his name when they won the bronze medal game. And I'm like, I'm sure today, however old he is, he must tell that story, or if he doesn't, he should, about how the building in Canada was cheering his name. It was amazing.
Amazing. That is amazing.
Oh, you know who the other goalies were in that tournament? I looked up the top five because I'm like, I remember there being like standout goalies. So the top five goalies, Zach Fucali was Canada's goalie.
Okay.
Okay. Igor Shesterkin, Thatcher Demko, and Ville Husso. And Dennis Godla won the MVP.
No kidding.
Like, how great is that?
So great. So great. Um, I guess sort of sticking with this theme. I mean, the tournament is designed for just great theater.
Sure.
Um, what would be the best team that you can recall?
For me, in the tournament I did, tournaments I
Yeah.
did, like that, the 2013 Russia, or the tournament in Russia in Ufa, which is you go right to the edge of the earth, turn left, and fly 4 other hours. It is like you. I'm like, where are we? You wake up, your time is so upside down and messed up, and so this goes back to naming or coming up with uh, the pronunciations of players. So the 2013 tournament, the U.S. won the gold medal. That team there was no doubt they were going to win, right? Like they were just going to win. Jacob Trouba, Johnny Gaudreau had 7 goals in 7 games. Vincent Trocheck, Seth Jones, John Gibson was the goalie. JT Miller had 7 assists in 7 games. Shane Gostisbehere uh, was like a fabulous player. They had about 7 or 8 names on that team that you looked at and you're like, first time I see Gostisbehere, how are you saying that name? Right? Like it was such a challenge and it was way across the world. And I don't know that um, people could appreciate it as much because at the times the games were on. But that to me was as good a team. I think I want to say there was 14 NHL players on that team.
That's wild. That's wild.
And here's another thing about the rosters is because it's an age out tournament. Sometimes the players' ages just happen to match up, right?
Totally.
So you could miss by a year and have 5 great players on one team and 4 great ones on another, but they don't intersect. And and sometimes it just all comes together.
Totally. And so you just mentioned some of the performances on that team, and gosh, again, just going back, and I'm like, oh yeah, there was that year and that player. Like the one that stood out to me was Tyler Steenberger scores the his only goal of the tournament,
Yeah,
scores the winner,
that was in
and
Buffalo.
yeah, and I think at that time, like he'd hardly played that game, and he
Right.
gets thrown out at the last minute, and he was a kid that wasn't drafted in the Bantam draft, and just had a great story. But when you look back, is there any individual performance that jumps out to you?
Well, I honestly, I would say like the Goldla performance was like I'd never heard of the kid, and pretty soon you couldn't not watch him. But I would say there's so many great players, Aaron, like that come through this tournament, um, and you think about, oh, what about that guy, and oh, what about this guy, and one that really jumped for me in Malmo in 2014 was Philip Forsberg. I'd heard a lot about him, and I'm like, oh my God, this guy is fantastic. Like he's big and rangy, and the way he holds his hands, the way he handles the puck, it was like you couldn't not notice him. He was a guy that I just wrote down, and I didn't have his stats here, but he was one that just because I didn't know enough about. There was a tournament in Toronto. I want to say it was the 2017 because I don't think it was the 15 one. And Russia had Provorov, Canada had Shabbat, and the U.S. had McAvoy. And these three players were like they were on the moon compared to the rest of the tournament.
I don't think Shabbat came off the ice that tournament.
He was playing 30 minutes a game,
Yeah,
and
it was wild.
they were yeah. It had to be that one because the U.S. beat Canada in the gold medal game in a shootout, and like McAvoy and Shabbat were on the ice forever.
Yeah.
Like
It's
so,
it's
so those would be like players that just kind of like jumped at me.
any moments that stand out to you as far as just, having goosebumps and again, I mean, if you spend 5 minutes on YouTube, I mean, there's just so many candidates, but just being there in the flesh, what,
Well, for me, would have been that 2015 gold. I brushed over it, the gold medal game
yeah,
that Canada Canada beat Russia 5-4. They had a 5-1 lead. It was over,
yeah,
and then Russia scored three goals at kind of like the latter part of the second period. It made it 5-4, and it was when you can feel nerves in the building. It was nervy, and the fact that it was Canada and Russia made it different. Like there, and so we knew going into the game as a broadcast company, I guess the numbers that tournament for whatever reason were really good, and we were like, this is going to be a big number, and the gold medal game was about 7 million and change, and um, that comeback. I'm standing between the benches. One of the great parts of junior hockey is the guys are young, so they're unpredictable. They don't have poise and scar tissue built up yet. So there are these wild swings in the game. Like at 5-1, like it's over, except it's not, right? Like I always have that phrase when I think of the tournament. It's over and then it's not. And it happens fast. And then you're like, oh my God, these kids are going to go back in the locker room and try and take a deep breath, right? And have to go play the third period.
and I'm sure it's not lost on them that they've got 7 million people at home
Oh,
watching
they're
them
they're
either.
they're probably pretty sure of that.
Yeah,
There's one other one. Like as it turned out, it was in my first tournament. Um, so that the Swedes were exceptional. They had a great team, and um, so they win to go into the final, and they're waiting the winner of Russia Canada, and so Russia's got a 6-1 lead, and again it's my first tournament, and so I get a picture from Cami, my wife, for those that don't know, and she's there with our boys, and Canada comes back, they lose 6-5. So in the third period, the kids have their hats on backwards, inside out. They're into the rally caps. The place is going off. It's madness. Canada scores to make it 6-5 on Andre Vasilevsky. They pull Vasilevsky at 6-5 with like 6 minutes left. And they put in Andre Makarov.
I don't remember. This is crazy.
So this kid sitting down the end of the bench there, it's now in the third period. He must be hiding. Like, don't put me in. And then they put him in. The kid stopped 7 in a row, and they win. So now they go to the final. They lose to Sweden 1-0 in overtime. Mika Zibanejad scores a beautiful rush for the only goal in overtime. Sweden outshot the Russians like 57-17. Makarov made 56 saves or 57 saves, one of the two. Like, just think of that. He was the backup. And the coach went, yep, Vasilevsky out, Makarov in.
That
I think
takes some
he,
stones.
I think he was a Buffalo draft, Andre Makarov. I think he was a Buffalo pick. But it's my first tournament. I'm like, oh my God, they're pulling the goalie. Like,
That poor, I can only imagine in his shoes. Like, it must be like, please hit me. Just please hit
oh,
me.
and I may have it wrong, but I think Canada had a power play. Like, it was even crazier than just 6-5.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like it was even more, if that's possible. But that was my first tournament. I was hooked.
No kidding. Ray, two quick ones, and these just sort of stood out to me. Sweden's 54 game winning streak in the round robin, or Canada's winning 5 golds in a row. What's more impressive?
Um, well, the 5 goals, because, you know, like, you still got to win. The Swedes proved in that 54 game winning streak that you don't have to win to do well. And it made no sense. Like, there were times they would win all the round robin games and you'd go, the team was, it was a pretty good team. And there were others where you'd go, oh my God, these guys are the best team by a mile. Yet they'd always find a way to lose. And I think the reason they lost, and one of the reasons they don't win as much as they should, is by nature they play conservatively. I think they play not to lose. And there are times you're like, man, look at this team. Like, go and attack. Like, make other teams try and keep up to you. But they don't play like that. They play a more, I think it's what makes them great NHL players. Like, they all play around the rink. Like, they play in a very responsible manner. And if you know the Swedes, that's really how the Swedes are. Great people, love their country, well organized. But if they had a little more risk in their game, I think that 54 game streak would have had a couple of wins in it.
So by my math, since you started doing the tournament, only 3 countries have won gold. Canada has 5, the USA has 4, Finland has 3. When you look at the other countries, and maybe taking Sweden out of the mix because they've certainly been in the hunt, is there any countries that stand out to you where, while they may not have gotten gold, there's been progress from just a development standpoint?
Well, I mean, immediately I go to the Czechs and the Slovaks, and the Czechs are bigger than Slovakia. Um, they have maybe more resources,
Yeah,
but it's complicated. Like, development is complicated. It's costly, and so I think they get to a certain point and they kind of hit a ceiling.
sure.
Um, I look at the Germans. Uh, they got a lot of good athletes. They got a lot
Yeah,
of good players. The biggest tug and pull they have are when those kids get to like 13 and 14, do they lose them to handball? Do they lose them to soccer? Like, some of their very best athletes? Because it's not easy if it's not the number one sport. And so I would say Germany, and you mentioned the Finns have won 3 times. They're so easy to overlook, right? Because everybody talks about Canada and now the US and Russia when they were in, and hopefully some way in the future there's a world event that can get them back because the tournament's better when they're in it. The Swedes, but the Finns, man, every tournament, this, it's a common line now, is they punch above their weight. They really do. They are feisty and ferocious competitors, and um, this Four Nations coming up. Everybody thinks Canada, U.S., Sweden. Oh yeah, and the Finns. I don't know. I'd never walk by the Finns.
Well, you know what? It's so funny you make the comment about the Swedes and having a bit more risk in their game. We had at our conference last year, Piri Lucarelli, who's the head of coach development for the Finnish Federation, present, and he talked about how they had to get away from joystick. He referred to it as joystick coaching, and they had to learn to let the players play and be creative, and credits that really for some of the success that we've seen internationally. Ray, just to close here, I don't know how you did with math in school. It wasn't maybe my
Up to
strength.
up to grade 9, fantastic. When they started, this is back when I went to school. When they
You were riding
started
the bus a lot. No Wi-Fi on the bus in the Western League in those days.
Wi-Fi, when they started putting letters in my math equations, I was out.
You
That
were
was
out, yeah.
just too complicated, man.
So you and I aren't going to figure this out, but I bet you somebody smarter than us would probably have a math equation that says, if you're broadcasting a hockey game, any game, World Juniors, NHL, in say, Vancouver on home soil, the further you get, all the things that could go wrong there, the further you get away. I'm sure there's an equation where there's just more things that could go sideways. So you
Yeah.
talk about, the path to Ufa, Russia, and some of the other locations that you've traveled to. And I'm just imagining like you and Gord going around the globe. It must have been like planes, trains, and automobiles. Some of your parts are. What's your best travel, or maybe not best travel
Well,
experience?
Gord would tell you, and he would be 100% correct. Navigationally, I am whatever next to useless is, that's
Yeah.
me. Like he would go, no, we got to walk up those stairs. I'd get to the top of the stairs and be lost. And he's like, he would just shake his head and know that everything he had to do times two because I couldn't get anywhere. So this trip to Ufa, so I forget where, we must have flown to London, to Moscow, to Ufa. Like it's a 5 hour flight from Moscow to Ufa. Like 5 hours. Like, where the hell are we going? So we get to this hotel and I look out my room and there's they had renovated the hotel or upgraded the hotel, whatever, updated it, not upgraded it, updated it because it was going to, it was hosting a whole bunch of people for the tournament. So out in the back parking lot, there was all this aluminum duct work. So they must have redone all the air ducts in the hotel. The pile of it, you can't believe. So I'm out there and I'm watching. There's like 8 of these guys out there. They got a flatbed truck. They're taking the extra stuff away. It's December. It's cold, cold. Some guys have gloves on, some don't. There's no machinery. They're loading it all by hand, tying it, going away and taking it wherever they were taking it. And then it took a week for them to get this aluminum
Oh
out of
my
the
God.
back part. And I'm like, oh my God, could they not have crumpled that up like with a big machine? And
Yeah.
but apparently not there. So down the street from our hotel, maybe a 10-minute walk, there was a pizza place. And it was a little hut. And so in the pizza place, we learned there's only one oven. So if 3 of you walked in there and you were third, it would take like 40 minutes to get your pizza. So we'd be racing there like idiots down the street and to get your order in first. And so one day we're going down there and our producer, all of a sudden he stops. He's like, whoa, 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 heads up. He's like in the middle of the street. And he had almost fallen into an open manhole.
Shut up.
The cover was gone.
Like no cones or anything.
Nothing. No, no, no. And so we said, like, that would have been really unfortunate because you would have been dead because none of us were coming there to help you.
Got
Like,
to get the pizza.
I had to get the pizza, man. And so on that trip, you and I talk about math, but we also talk about our lack of technology knowledge. So Landon's playing in the American League. at that time. And so he's got a game that while I'm over there. So I watch his game. He scored that night. It was really good. I get up in the morning and my phone's shut off. So I show Gord, I'm like, this is ridiculous. What's going on? He's like, I don't know. It says you've exceeded your data limit. Like, how is that possible? And he goes, what were you watching? And I go, well, I don't know. I just watched Landon play last night. He goes, were you hooked into the Wi-Fi? I go, no, how do you do that? And so Gord had to get on the phone to somebody in IT.
I've seen that movie before.
And go, hey, dum-dum here.
Yeah.
So that's how so all of those things happened on that one trip. It was, it was, here's the last thing on that trip. Now I'm just, all these things come in. So I'm talking to Cammie on FaceTime, right? I'm out in the street and Gord is like 100 meters up the road and he's like, Ray. And I'm like, kind of giving him like the wave of the arm, like beat it.
Yeah.
And he's like, Ray. And then he kind of points behind me and I turn around. I don't even realize I'm in front of this huge building, right? And there are these two guys standing there and they got guns. It's a military barracks.
Oh.
And I'm on a FaceTime. And so I'm sure they were trying to see, like, am I trying to film the place or not? I was like, and I'm giving Gord the heave ho, like, like beat it. And Gord's like, hey. And so finally I hang up. I'm like, I got to go, click. So,
you got on a watch list.
that was not good.
Well, hey, Ray, I know that the holidays are coming up, and I don't know if you hear this, and I think this is extended to yourself, but also Gordon, so many people that frankly, for many of us, you've become like eggnog and Christmas carols around the time of the year, where you've just been such a part of so many great memories around the holidays, and really appreciate you coming in. This was a lot of fun and spending some time with us.
Awesome, Aaron. Always good to see you. I got to say, like, I'm starting to get to an age where you look back and maybe appreciate some things a little bit more, or take a half a second to go, yeah, that was pretty cool. Like, doing this tournament was the best. I just loved it. I love working with Gord. I love the people that we had, the crew that we had, like, which is the best of the best at TSN. Like the producer and the director, like, we would have so much fun trying to put all this chaos together. And, because we're all in it trying to put the best show on. And I miss those people. I miss working with them all the time. They're just such good people. It's a great time of the year. And it's pretty cool that people are sitting around with their families and watching you broadcast the game. So I miss it. I loved it. And I'm going on a little trip this year. I get back on the 28th and I'll be sitting on the couch watching it when I get back.